As a health communication professor, communication in medical settings is vitally important to me. I recently found out about 5 years ago that I have a condition where I am genetically losing my hearing. Currently, I have 13% of my hearing in one ear and about 22% remaining in my left. When you look at me, and when my students look at me, they would never assume that I am moderately severely deaf. Without technology, it is a scary world. So thank goodness for my hearing aids, but I've recently learned that I need to learn more, right? I need to make sure that I have ways of communicating. So I took it upon myself, and individuals a part of my life are thankfully also learning ASL, so that in case I do get to a point where I hear nothing, I can still communicate. Now, what does that have to do with implicit bias or perceptions? I'm not going to force you to answer this, but when you walk in here and you see someone who's using ASL, how do you feel? What thoughts go through your head? Have you actually thought about what's happening as we are starting to make impressions? Well, I hope you do, because the first 30 seconds of any conversation that you have sets the tone for how the rest of that conversation is going to go. So think for a second, if someone comes at you hot and they're yelling at you and you're like, you didn't do X, Y, or Z. Start to feel defensive. Start making a plan of how you're going to respond. Yeah, we all do. If someone comes at you and they're really complimenting you and they're making you feel good, you're making you feel comfortable in a situation, maybe you're really nervous about having that conversation with a provider, and they make you feel comfortable, you're going to have a completely different interaction. A lot of the patients that I work with, and I closely work with LGBTQIA populations and neurodivergent populations, both of which have had a lot of bad experiences with providers. And that's why the majority of the work that I do is actually working with the providers to help make sure that the interactions that we're having are better. So I do work with patients one-on-one, but I'm mostly working with the hospitals and clinics in my area and teaching them about being trans-friendly, about understanding neurodivergence. Actually, in the last couple of weeks, I have found that some of the work that I'm doing is actually working with medical providers about their own neurodiversity and recognizing how often we are neurodiverse. And it's this light bulb moment that we realize, oh my gosh, that explains everything. I found out about 2 years ago that I'm on the spectrum, and it wildly opened my eyes to everything that I do. And so now my first 30 seconds has drastically changed, because now I start looking for patterns. I start looking to see if possibly I'm working with someone who's neurotypical or neurodivergent, and then that changes how I work with them from then on in. My first impressions are now a conscious decision to pay attention to little things and not just let what I see on the surface influence what I'm doing, because that is where implicit bias happens. Now, working in academia, working with medical providers, working with different hospitals, we probably hear the words implicit bias a lot. Have we heard this? We're kind of familiar with this? Okay. But how often do they take the next step and say how to actually be consciously working against it? Or they're just like, we're all implicit bias. We all do this. Bye. It's going to get in my way. So let's play a game. I don't have any prizes. I'm a professor. Yeah. But I'm going to have us play a quick game. And what I want you to do is I want you to think about who these people are. This is that whole idea of our first impressions. What first comes to mind? Don't overthink it just yet. I'll make you think later. But right now, what just first comes to mind? So who are these people? And what first comes to mind when you see them? All right, you ready? All right, we're going to do a couple fun ones first. Whoop, I'm going to hit the right button. That's what I'm going to do. So which of these people would you want to climb Mount Everest with? At 9 o'clock in the morning? Yeah, that's right. I'm thinking about hiking. The gentleman on the right or the gentleman on the left? How many of you would say the one on the right? Okay. How many of you say the one on the left? We'll see who lives. So if you chose John Glenn, you are all dead. He is an actor. Oftentimes he plays somebody who, leads a pack of people that mostly die. So y'all, poor decision makers. Then we have Appa, who has climbed Mount Everest 17 times. So well done for those of you that looked at this beautiful smiling man and went, yeah, I'm going to trust him. All right. One more fun one. What is your first impression of this woman? She's famous. She also has a famous son. Any guesses? Okay. My students always say that, which just cracks me up. She is Betty Naismith Graham, the inventor of whiteout. She's also the mother of a really famous monkey. All right, but now let's get to the heart of this. Let's think about the actual patients that we are going to be working with. We meet a new individual. What's coming to mind? What might this individual need? What challenges, what barriers, what do we know about this individual just from the start of things? Other things you can shout them out real quick. Okay, yeah. All right, now let's think about this individual. Are there assumptions we make right out the gate? The answer is yes. Every single one of us have already started processing. If you're thinking in work mode, got that work hat on, we're already starting to make ideas, come up with ideas of things that we might need to do to help this individual. Everyone is doing it. Everyone is using their implicit bias right now. Whether that's good or bad, it's happening right now. But where are these perceptions coming from? Are they coming from past experiences that we've had? Are they coming from things we've seen in the media, things we've read, our education, just things we've heard? Or is it also coming from a lack of knowledge of not having worked with a person like that? And the fears and the confusion and maybe that little bit of an unsettled feeling of like, I don't know where to start with this. That's, first and foremost, normal. Everyone is going to experience that. That is part of being human. So we're just going to need to ease in and be accepting of that uncomfortability when we're working with someone new. And that's okay. What we do with that afterwards is the vitally important part. So this is starting of the perception process. And we talk about this a great deal in communication, and this idea of our first impressions, those first 30 seconds, there's a lot happening. And what's interesting, at least to me, is that we're not really paying attention to any of it. So it starts with selecting information. Now, unless you are typically ADHD, my ADHDers, we collect all the information, which is why we get overwhelmed really fast. I love seeing a couple of the shaking of the heads. Welcome. Being neurospicy is awesome. But we take in everything. And then we get a little overwhelmed because we don't know how to organize it, which is that next step. I'm going to have you practice some selecting in just a second, but we're going to pick things that are salient to us, things that we identify with, things that we have seen before, things that seem normal to us, things that are weird and strange. Those are typically things that become pretty salient. If somebody's wearing a strange outfit or are talking about things that we're not used to, we're going to pay attention to those things because they are interesting to us. And then we're going to organize all that information. Maybe we're listening to a medical background, so we're going to get the chronological nature of what first happened with this patient, what's happening currently, what we think might be happening next. We're going to organize that because we like patterns. We're going to categorize things that make sense, and we're going to put our little piles together. Then we're going to make interpretations. What do we need to do with this? How do I need to proceed with this individual? So this is a whole little process. And the thing is, again, this is happening within the first 30 seconds of that conversation. 30 seconds to do this whole little process. And you're not thinking about it at all. It just happens. So we're going to play a little game again with our perception making process. We're going to test our selection ability.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make?
Go!
The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear?
Go!
So I heard someone say, because we were watching, we were watching the balls. We were told to pay attention to how many balls were being dribbled. So you're selecting to pay attention to that ball. So if you are only paying attention to the ball, of course you're going to miss the really cute moonwalking bear. That's selection at its finest. I cannot pay attention to multiple things at the time, right? If you're having a conversation with a group of people before you and someone behind you starts talking about a talking goat and a tutu, I'm sorry, friends, I love you. The what just happened? Like, I want to know more about this tutu and a goat thing. What the heck is going to happen? So my attention, what's salient to me, is going to be this tutu-wearing goat or my moonwalking bear. So it's important to remember that it is impossible for us to select and actively pay attention to everything that's happening. So we're going to miss some things. And the things that we're missing are the things that we're not seeing as salient, the things that we are not paying attention to, which means our perceptions need to constantly be checked and rechecked, because as we're getting more information, that's going to change the way that we're thinking about what's happening around us. 99% of what's happening as we're making these first impressions and we're making informed decisions is happening without us thinking about it. This is all unconscious behavior. All right, so implicit biases, I'm going to formally define in just a second. This is coming because we're not thinking about it. This is an unconscious thing. It's just based on all of we call them gestalts, but they're all of these ideas and file folders in our brains. That's the metaphor I like to use. All of the information that we take in, we put in these nice little file folders. And as we're meeting different people, these files are kind of being thrown at us, and we start making impressions based on them. So, too soon. What I want you to do with this next individual, I want you to make note, either on a piece of scrap paper or just in your head, that's fine. What are your very first thoughts? Don't overthink it, just what are your very first thoughts, emotions, anything that's coming up in your head. Just make specific conscious note of what's popping up in your head. So where did these thoughts come from? What's happening here? Right? Is this based on our personal experiences? Like, a lot of you are picking up on that this is a doctor or nurse and a patient. We're getting those nonverbals of, am I to blame? I felt a certain strong way. We're reading those nonverbals. And side note, 80% of what we say is not in the words that we use. It's how we say it. Right? My mom started teaching me that when I was about 10. It's not what you said, it's how you said it. There's a reason that I chose the spontaneous sarcasm, because that is my love language. And my students know it. Like, can we ask you a question, Dr. J? No. No, you can't. And then I just stare at them like, I don't know how to proceed. First year. And then after that, they're like, yeah, okay, whatever, Dr. J. So what I need you to do is, I'm like, okay. But that's my love language. But what are we seeing happening, both the verbal and the nonverbal? You only have the nonverbal here. The interpretations that we're making is implicit bias. Right? That's the core of what this is a form of bias that occurs automatically and, most importantly, unintentionally. So if you're ever called out or you've ever felt called out about implicit bias and you're like, oh no, I never do that. Yes, you do, because we all do, and that's okay. But we can be conscious of it and make better decisions moving forward. We can check our bias at the door, the metaphorical door. As soon as we see that it's happening, we're going to take a quick breath and go, all right, where am I getting this? Oh, snap. I'll be all right. Okay, so this becomes part of this impression formation, right? This is what's happening at the very beginning. It is formed very quickly. Again, within those first 30 seconds, we start this process. It can also go over slowly as we have more interactions with that patient, with that client, with that type of person. And also a key piece of this is that we can have this bias in a positive way or a negative way. I can meet someone and be like, oh my gosh, you totally remind me of my friend Heidi. And I adore Heidi, and she's super smart, and she's super together, and she is just incredible. So I'm going to assume, yes, you are, I saw that. I'm going to assume that you know these things, right? So I'm going to look at Nancy, and I'm going to, Nancy reminds me of my friend Heidi, and I'm just going to assume that she knows this stuff. I don't need to teach her these things. I'm just going to assume that she does it. And then when she shows that she doesn't know something, I'm like, what? How did you not possibly know that? But I had a bias that she already knew it, right? As people that work in the medical field, have you ever had an interaction with a provider that's like, oh, you know these things, so I'm just going to talk way over your head. And you're like, no, time out. I know about this. I know jack about this. I need you to teach me this part. This is where those gestalts start coming in. We have positivity bias and negativity bias. Oftentimes we only focus on the negativity bias, but we can also do this and just assume the best for people, and then we're shocked when they aren't meeting up to those expectations. And we can still do this with our patients too. We assume that they're doing things and they're like, wait, what? Why aren't you doing that? I totally thought you were doing that. Oh crap. I assumed these things about you in a positive way because I had formed a positive bias because I wasn't being conscious of what do I actually know and what have I actually seen. A lot of this comes from stereotyping. We all do it. And this is one of the easiest ways to be conscious about this, is to catch ourselves when we're stereotyping. All right, what are we seeing happening when we have those thoughts are like either fitting that stereotype or like, oh man, some stereotypes are true. That's what happened to me when I went to Paris. Woof. They are mean. I will not go back. But I recognize that that was a stereotype. I recognize that that was my one experience, and I should probably go and have more experiences. If anyone would like to fund my trip to Paris to have new experiences, I'll send you my Venmo. But this is coming from things that we've seen. These are categorizations that we've seen. Remember that organizational process of the perception process? That's where this is going to come in. I like categories, and when I see little bits of information, I just go, cool. All that information goes into this bucket, stereotype bucket, and then I carry that around with me. And if I'm not being conscious, I'm just going to go back to that and assume that all those things are true. All right? Stereotype and prejudice are not the same thing. All right? We all stereotype. The prejudice part comes in when you start actively treating someone different because of those stereotypes. That's where we're getting into that prejudice lens. So we can recognize that we're all stereotyping people. That's how we double check things. That's fine. But we don't want that to impact how we're actually treating those people, because we are all individuals. We all have intersectionality. I am cisgender. I'm highly educated. I have tattoos. I am deaf. I am neurodivergent. I have a whole lot of things that make me who I am. And I don't want anyone to just see me as one thing, as one type of person. I don't want everyone to focus on the fact that I'm deaf. Most people don't even know that I'm deaf until I tell them. All right? So that's one of the important pieces of this idea of intersectionality, is that there's a whole lot of stuff going on, some of it that we can see outwardly, but a lot of it is hiding beneath the surface. If you think about a glacier, and we use the glacier metaphor all the time, what do we see on the surface? Gender, skin color, age, any of those things. And we start making impressions based on that. But then what's happening underneath that we have no idea about? Our invisible illnesses, our just backgrounds, our characters, our experiences that we've had. All of those things play a part in why or why not I might be willing to go to a doctor, why I might or might not be adhering to the prescriptions that I have been given. And we as advocates need to be aware of what all is happening, as much of this picture as we can, so that we can be the best possible advocates. When we think about intersectionality, this is a tool that we can use, a way of thinking about the best possible ways, because we might not know why an individual is choosing to do one thing or not. We are assuming we know why they are doing a behavior or not adhering to a behavior. But until we actually consciously start having some questions about this, we're missing a ton of the picture. So this is all about being conscious and asking purposeful questions so that we can create the best possible plan and be the best possible advocates for the clients that we're working with. Real quick, the other aspect with intersectionality is that this is a hierarchy. And this is a hierarchy within systems of how they're going to treat people and how people are going to get the care that they need. But it's also a hierarchy for us. Where do I place my neurodiversity in my intersectionality? Where do I place my gender? Where do I place my religion, my race, my anything? How am I ranking these and what's important? Because my identity, I get to decide what parts of my identity are really important. My provider should not be making those choices for me. They should not be only focusing on one thing, because that one thing may not really, like my gender or my sexual orientation doesn't need to be on display. It's not the first thing that's important to me. These other aspects are. I need to know how my client orders those things so that I can make a plan that incorporates those aspects of who they are in the correct order. Because that plan has to incorporate those aspects. And so I need to make sure that I know which of those aspects are going to be really important. To help us do this, we need to be curious. We need to ask lots of questions. We need to make sure that we're building that rapport, we're building that bond. Then we can creatively come up with solutions with our clients, with our patients, to get them the best help that they possibly need. And that's also going to start with us by listening. I teach a 16-week class on listening and interviewing and counseling for my genetic counselors that I'm working with my students. And it's fascinating. It's also very ironic for me. That's not lost on me at all. Especially if you go in to teach a class on listening and you forgot your hearing aids that day. Super fun. Super fun. I'm like, all right, y'all are going to yell at me today. We're going to play charades. It's going to be great. It's happened twice. Not lying. So what do we need to do? I know I'm running short on time. We need to offer empathy. There's a difference between empathy and sympathy. Empathy is we're actually putting yourself in that person's shoes, which guess what? You can't always do. If I'm working with a trans individual who's a trans black male, I'm damn near translucent. Ooh, I swore, I'm sorry. I can't put myself in those shoes. But as I'm hearing the situation, I can say, you know what? I have no idea what that would be like, but I'm here to listen to you and hear what your experiences are and see what solutions I can have, what we can come up with together. That sounds really painful. That sounds really challenging. I'm here to listen, and see what we can come up with together. I'm going to be that empathetic person. Sympathy is when you silver line things. If you're fans of Brene Brown, you know this. She talks about ooh, that sucks. Want a sandwich? That's sympathy. You have a client who's just lost a child. Well, at least you know you can get pregnant. Are you freaking kidding me? But that's what sympathy would say. At least this. That's not empathy. Empathy is, that's really painful. That's really, I'm so sorry. What can I do? How can I help? Consciously making steps to understand what's happening. Right? Stopping and questioning ourselves, stopping and questioning and getting more information from our patients, checking my own knowledge, checking where my perceptions came from. Like, yeah, I have these thoughts in my head, but where did they actually come from? It's all about slowing down, taking a step, taking a breath, listening a bit more actively, and making conscious choices for how we can best help our patients. Thank you.